Hello, and thanks for having me. I'm the warm-up act before Sarah comes out to stun you with the results of the Calgary Connect project thus far. I'm going to take an opportunity to explain why wetlands and amphibians are vital to ecosystems and for people. Also, we're not all somber, serious facts here. I'm going to give you a few fun facts to stash away in your brain to impress at your next cocktail hour. To give you a sense of who's talking, my name is Tyne. I'm a professional wildlife biologist and environmental consultant, which means that I work with a variety of clients to discover which species are on the land and then plan to minimize human impact or optimize conservation strategies. I'm also, big jargon word here, a bioacoustician and remote detection specialist. That's a really wordy way of saying that I'm a high-tech wildlife spy and eavesdropper. I use audio recorders and photography to track wildlife and understand wild species behavior. So jumping right in, wetlands are incredibly important to biodiversity. We can see here on these maps of Alberta, there are lots of areas with wetlands, and they overlap really well with high areas of biodiversity. So on this species richness map, brown is high biodiversity and blue is relatively low biodiversity, or a few number of species observed. What you might notice on this biodiversity map is there's a lot of blue overlapping our neighborhood here in the greater Calgary area. But part of the issue is this map is really zoomed out. So if we zoom way in, the wetlands in this area are sort of dotted throughout the landscape, rather than being contiguous like up in the muskeg in northern boreal forest. So in this area we have sort of these oases of high biodiversity and fields of relatively low or lean biodiversity. So you can see how these wetlands in this area become very important to local species. Local species use these sites for breeding, eating, living. Wetlands are sort of singles bars, restaurants, nurseries, family homes. And when they're healthy, they tend to be louder than Grand Central Station. So here's an example of a healthy wetland during the day. Notice there's lots of different types of sounds. The sounds are fairly continuous, and there's lots of them. And here similarly is a loud, healthy wetland at night. When we're studying wetlands, amphibians can become our canaries in the wetland, so to speak. So they sort of tell us about the health of our water system. So in the water, they can be, because they breathe through their skin and their skin is very porous, they can be really sensitive to changes in things like salt and acid and other types of pollutants, including heat or other biologically active chemicals. Or they can be sensitive to sort of missing components like oxygen. And because they live part of their life in the water and part of their life out of the water, they're also sensitive to changes in the upland, including things like vegetation stripping or interrupted connectivity that sort of take away the areas where they can forage or overwinter. Wetlands are clearly very important to a wide diversity of species, and that includes humans. There's a large list here on this slide of all of the valuable services that a healthy wetland can give to us as humans. And Ramsar estimates that converting 1 hectare of wetland results in a loss of $33,000 US, or about $45,000 Canadian in ecosystems that we would have to pay to replace every year. So let's get to know our little canaries then. We don't. So this is our whole slide of all of the species that might occur within the Greater Calgary area. The top 4 here: wood frog, tiger salamanders, western toad, and boreal chorus frog, are all species that Miistakis has observed within Calgary or the Greater Calgary area during various surveys, so Call of the Wetland or this current Calgary Connected Project, not to give away the results too much. The bottom 3 here are species that have been observed in the area surrounding Calgary by other sources. So we haven't observed them yet, but they're around. So let's talk about this top 4 here. I'm gonna go through each of these top 4 here, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what they sound like, so that if you're out in the evening and listening to a wetland on your property and you happen to hear something like this, you'll be able to identify them. And then I'm also going to give you a really cool fun fact about each of them, sort of their little superpower. So the wood frog sounds like it's making a series of grunts when it's advertising for mates. So a single male might sound like this, where if you get them all a bunch of bachelors in a group together, they might sound like this. Bonus points if you recognize that sound from before. So usually these wood frogs are found in areas surrounded by forest, as is indicated by the wood frog name. And they have a really interesting superpower. Most Canadian amphibians tend to hide from the winter weather by burrowing deep into the ground or deep into the mud at the bottom of a wetland, where they'll be below the frost line. They won't freeze. They do this because ice is very sharp when it forms. It typically forms sort of these tiny crystals, which can be sort of like razor blades that would cut into cells or tissues. And humans have an experience of this as well, where if you got frostbite on your cheeks or your fingers in the winter, that's what's happening. The ice crystals are forming and sort of puncturing your cells and your tissue. Wood frogs, however, have a really impressive skill, and they're able to freeze solid in the winter. And they do this because they mobilize sugar from their liver into their blood that sort of blunts these crystals, kind of like an antifreeze, and allows them to freeze solid without having the ice crystals puncture their tissues. Tiger salamanders are your quietest neighbors, and they're next on our list here. So they're most likely the only salamander that you will find in this area, and all of the salamanders and newts, the caudata, they don't have vocal cords. So if you put your hand on your throat and you hum, that's your vocal cords moving, and that's how sound is produced there. However, tiger salamanders don't have those vocal cords like other amphibians do. They have to produce sound with forced air. So it's possible that they can produce sound, they just don't produce it very often. Nobody's yet caught a tiger salamander on recording. So if anybody manages to get that one, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But it is possible. Other salamanders have been observed producing forced air sounds like hisses, shh, which doesn't engage the vocal cords, or pops, pop, 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 pop. They're pushing air through sort of something to make it pop, or toots, farts, those kinds of sounds. Their superpowers are many and varied. They're a very strange animal. So for example, one of their superpowers is to go from gills to lungs, and so when they start off as larvae or small salamanders, they are bound to the water, and they have gills, which are in this bottom photo here. You can kind of see these dragon-like appendages, and that's their gills. As they grow older, those gills shrink and disappear, and they start breathing through their lungs, which allows them to sort of go on land a little bit more easily. one of their superpowers that I usually have to be very cognizant of as a wildlife biologist is if it fits in its mouth, it will eat it. So they've been known to eat things like large invertebrates or even immature rodents. For a wildlife biologist, if you're capturing salamanders for a project or displacing salamanders for a project, you have to be very careful how you sort your salamanders, because if a younger sibling fits in their mouth, they will also eat their younger sibling. So boreal chorus frogs are a smallish frog, and they sport racing stripes. Unlike the wood frog, the racing stripes go all the way down their sides. The males of the species tend to impress females with an excellent rendition of a finger going over a comb. So a single male sounds like this. And when all the boys are back in town, it sounds a little bit like this. So even though these frogs are called boreal chorus frogs, their superpower is to be a habitat generalist. So you can see by this map here on the right all of the locations that ABMI has detected boreal chorus frog, and it tends to span all of the habitats in Alberta, excluding alpine habitats. So that includes things like tame pasture and native prairie. It includes things like boreal forest, as the name indicates, but it also includes things like urban habitats. We've caught lots of these on recordings in the city of Calgary. I like to say the toughest toad in town is the western toad. Western toad is the last species that I'm going to talk about in detail like this, and they're the last one that Miistakis is recorded in this area. And they can be told apart from the Canadian toads because they don't have cranial ridges or little bumps between their eyes on the top of their head. The western toads make sort of a peeping sound, and sometimes it can be confused with other birds like the Wilson snipe. So a single male might sound like this. Where a group of bachelors will sound like this. So the superpower of this toughest toad is their ability to master really subpar breeding conditions. So up here on the top left, you see a big female and a smaller male sort of caught in their amorous embrace. You can see all of these strings are eggs that she is laying and the male is fertilizing. And they are doing that in a tiny little pond on a disturbed right-of-way. And so they're happy to find a mud-filled truck rut and put their eggs in there, and often those eggs become tadpoles. Unfortunately, this hasn't stopped them from becoming at risk or federally listed as a species of special concern. And part of the reason is that these tiny little guys down on the bottom left here have to find their way from those subpar habitats up into the forest to find little hidey holes that they can spend their winters in that are deep enough to go below the frost line. Okay, so the three remainders that we haven't actually captured on Miistakis recordings yet are the Columbia spotted frog, the northern leopard frog, and the Canadian toad. And so I'd like to play those sounds for you just so you have an idea in case you hear them, and you can let us know. The big Columbia spotted frog should be found sort of on the western side of our region here, and they sort of make a knocking kind of sound. It sounds like this. not to be confused with woodpeckers, obviously. And there's an even bigger frog called the northern leopard frog, which might be found on the eastern side of our region, and it sort of makes a chugging and a grunt sound, a little bit like this. And finally, we also have one more toad in our region. It's the Canadian toad. It has the most beautiful song of all, and it can be found on the eastern side. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? So if you're looking for more details on how to identify amphibians in Alberta, the Alberta Conservation Association has the Alberta Volunteer Amphibian Monitoring Program, and there are links to that, all the resources that are available from that group on my website under resources, and then on the fun tab under the citizen science. Thank you so much for supporting Alberta wetlands and keeping our wetlands loud. Your stewardship supports a whole bunch of biodiversity and also supports healthy water for healthy people. So thank you so much for participating. So if you would like to check out more resources, you can check out my website, avianeco.com, under the resources tab. The resource links has some excellent audio samples and resources for listening to animals or learning to listen to animals. And the fun tab, or the fun section under the resources, has more citizen science projects and just general learning resources for folks who are interested. So thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful amphibian listening season coming up this April to August.